Okay, thank you for having some interest in a place to talk. I sure appreciate you being here. I'm looking forward to talking with anyone and everyone this coming Sunday as we discuss what did Jesus mean when he said Lord of the Sabbath. What was that? What did he have in mind there? We're in our red letter series. Let's look at Matthew chapter 12, verses 1 through 8. At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath. His disciples were hungry and began to pick some heads of grain and eat them. When the Pharisees saw this, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is unlawful on the Sabbath." Um, Golly, I think I would be tempted to do something that, no, I don't know if that's true or not. When I'm doing something that other people deem inappropriate or wrong, even when I have no belief that it's inappropriate or wrong, um, I wonder if I would be a little more discreet about it. I don't know, but it doesn't. Maybe they were, maybe they weren't here. Anyway, Jesus answers. Haven't you read what the disciples did when he and his companions? I'm sorry. Haven't you read what David did when he and his companions were hungry? He entered the house of God, he and his companions, and ate the consecrated bread, which was not lawful for them to do, but only for the priest. Or haven't you read in the law that the priest on Sabbath duty in the temple, desecrate the Sabbath and yet are innocent? I tell you that something greater than the temple is here. If you had known what these words mean, I desire mercy, not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the innocent, for the Son of Man is Lord of the Sabbath. There's our passage. That's the one we're going to ask some questions about this week, this coming Sunday, at a place to talk. What do you think made this unlawful? What was the problem? The problem was they were pretty strict, legalistic, you might say, about the Sabbath. I usually don't answer questions. Why did I answer that question? I don't know. I want to know what you think made this unlawful, and I want us to think through: was it logical to be as strict about the Sabbath as they were? What are some things that are considered unlawful today by religious people that society has decided isn't unlawful? In other words, what are some things that that the common people, average people, non-religious people, and some religious people practice that that used to be considered unlawful, or religious people might still consider unlawful, that society just has said it's not unlawful anymore. Here are some examples that we might consider: Sabbath, Sunday activities, alcohol. Is it okay to have a drink? There's debate in Scripture about that. Of course, Paul told Timothy, "Have a little wine for your stomach's sake." Growing up Baptist and growing up in that world, I was certainly as a teenager looking for any opportunity, any option you could find in the book to say, "No, no, no, that's not what it meant." um, drinking is legal, it's widely accepted, and it's even often celebrated. In fact, you got to consider the fact that Jesus's first miracle was turning water into wine. So, and I know, the people in my background and some people in my world still today would say Jesus turned the water into Welch's Baptist grape juice, ready for Holy Communion, and we can discuss that. Let's talk about that. Another thing would be divorce and remarriage, homosexual relationships, cohabitation, living together before marriage, women in leadership, certain medical practices. Some religious groups are totally opposed to blood transfusion. Some religious groups are opposed to contraception. Some people are opposed to organ transplants. Some religious people are opposed to abortion. Um, I vote passionately for a woman's right to choose. At the same time, somebody asked me the other day, would if you had a 12-year-old daughter and she was raped and was pregnant, would you have an abortion? Would you choose for her to have an abortion? And I said probably not. Um, and the more liberal leaning people that I was sitting with at the time uh, thought I was very, very wrong. And and I don't know. That's a tough, tough decision. I would say it's very likely that in my scenario, because I'm married to a wife that is level-headed, intelligent, um, I would probably lean on her to make that decision because she knows women's bodies much better than I do. Not that I'm not, very, very interested and completely willing to be an explorer, but you get the idea. Oh my goodness. Uh, that may only come across in a place to talk conversation and not others. But anyway, that's kind of where I'm thinking about this. You say, Josh, you're kind of getting off topic. Okay, I'm moving on. Art, music, entertainment, interfaith relationships, blasphemy, sacred language. These are things that society doesn't really deem as wrong as many religious people today. And so let's talk about those. What are some other ones? I just kind of went through and listed a bunch of them, but maybe something else comes to your mind. I'll tell you. Well, let me leave some to be said. Um, Jesus doesn't seem to debate whether it is or isn't lawful, but rather talks about mercy being greater than sacrifice. I think that's, for me, that's a huge, huge concept that we have to keep in mind and remember, that mercy is much bigger and better and more important than sacrifice. I had a distant relative that just made a post about how the demonic left would never forgive a a assassin, and and I was blown. I was shocked. I was shocked that somebody. I mean, that's hate. That is hate. Period. End of story. That statement is hate. It is hateful. Calling the left, a whole group of people, indiscriminately demonic, that is hate. That's not Christian. That's not Christ-like. That's not remotely. It's hate. Period. End of story. That is hate. There are people on the right and the left that understand mercy, that understand grace, that understand forgiveness. I really intended for this to just be questions. It's so hard for me to just ask questions. Jesus doesn't seem to debate whether it is or isn't lawful, but rather talks about mercy being greater than sacrifice. So, so I wonder what you think about this. Do you think that Jesus said, in Jesus's mind, he would have said, yes, this was was wrong. It was unlawful. It was breaking the rules, but it was necessary because they were hungry. Is Would this be equivalent to somebody who was starving, stealing some vegetables to feed their children? I'm asking. I want us to talk about this. This is what we're going to discuss this coming Sunday at A Place to Talk. How should we interpret "I desire mercy, not sacrifice" today? Well, there's a question. Would you interpret that to say when a starving person steals food to feed their hungry children, is that would giving them mercy be what God would want us to do? Maybe another question in that same vein would be when somebody illegally enters a country seeking asylum, safety, survival, jobs, food. Would that be a time that we should offer mercy and not sacrifice their life to the law? What? does something greater than the temple in here mean? Was Jesus being arrogant? I'm greater than the temple. Was he being confident? Hey, God is here. I'm greater than the temple. Or was it something totally different? What if Jesus wasn't referring to himself, but rather he was saying humanity, people are greater than the temple? I think that's something we should discuss. Are people more important than religion? Are people more important than faith? Are people more important than sacrifice? All of those things. What's the most important thing? Was Jesus giving a precedent for civil disobedience to the civil disobedience when laws harm people? Should we stand up and scream out for civil disobedience because laws are sometimes harming people? For example, um, I mean, some parts of the political spectrum are still referring to the left as if they were evil because of the way they responded to the Black Lives Matter movement. Others of us might say they tried to peacefully protest by kneeling during the national anthem and you lost your mind. What else were they to do except continue to escalate until you heard? Black Americans weren't, and in some ways aren't, treated fairly. What do you do? Is there a time for civil disobedience? Some people would say, yeah, there's a time for civil disobedience. That's what we did on January the 6th. I would certainly not be we in that. I was not there. I did not think that was appropriate. I didn't think that burning down buildings and trashing the place and looting was appropriate during the Black Lives Matter movement. But I did want to say, what are we going to frickin' do? You got to do something. There are, I've said this privately many times, there are Confederate flags around town that I would love to rip down and burn up. And surely as I just said this, that's going to happen and people are going to come accusing me. Um, I'll just tell you up front, although I'd love to do it, I'm not willing to break that law because I'm not going to trespass. I don't want to get shot. I don't want to do that. But I'm not a fan of the Confederate flags. I feel like they represent hate. Um, was Jesus giving a precedent for civil disobedience when laws harm people? Was Jesus saying, yes, you can go march on the Capitol on January the 6th if you think that people were being harmed, if you can go loot and destroy a town, a city, if you think people aren't being treated equally? Was Jesus giving precedence for that? Um, I mean, personally, I think that Martin Luther King Jr.'s message of nonviolence, Gandhi's message of nonviolence those messages were more in line with Jesus's message than other messages. I think that Charlie Kirk being shot. By the way, we did discuss Charlie Kirk this past Sunday, but I actually was the one to bring it up, or I was kind of like, why aren't we talking about this? Because I was surprised that it didn't come up on its own. Charlie Kirk should not have been killed. It was wrong. No ifs, ands, and buts. Period. It was wrong. My family member distant family member um, who said, what did he call? He called the left demonic. That's hate. Period. End of story. That's hate. That's hateful. It's wrong. Um, I wouldn't call the right or the left. I I find myself way, way right in some subjects, and I found myself way, way left in some subjects. And I would not call either side demonic. I will call out hate. And sometimes some things that people say and do are hateful. Was Jesus giving precedence for civil disobedience when laws harm people? I don't know, but he certainly was giving his disciples approval and a permission when they broke the law to eat. What are the dangers of using this passage to excuse sin under the banner of mercy? That would be a question that might come from a different perspective than you would usually hear from me. What are the dangers of using this passage to excuse sin under the banner of mercy? That's something we have to ask. We cannot excuse sin. At the same time, we can't find ourselves calling things sinful that are just not your preference. Just because something's not your preference does not mean that it is sin. How does this passage shape debates about works versus grace? We can talk about that, and we will this Sunday at A Place to Talk. What do you think about the idea that maybe humanity is something greater than the temple here? That's the big question I want to ask. I think maybe Jesus was saying something that's greater than the temple is here, and he was referring to humanity. Let's talk about that this Sunday. Thank you for having any interest in A Place to Talk and our questions. Sundays, Hickory, 10:30 a.m. Like or subscribe here. Um, you're going to keep getting these videos, and if you want to participate, I sure do enjoy the fact that you have some interest. If you have questions for me, I'm Josh Live at talktojosh.net. You can reach out to me anytime.